pleasure to present the CLE today. Judicial has been my go-to title company since I was a newly admitted attorney many years ago. In addition to what Richard had mentioned about my background, it's interesting to note that I also manage a co-op. In addition to representing a couple of co-ops and condos, I also manage a co-op in White Plains. We're going to use that co-op today as an example and talk about the offering plan and some of the documents which pertain to that co-op. It's called Surrey Strathmore. It's located on Bryant Avenue in White Plains. I was living in the building at the time. The old managing agent had quit. I was supposed to be the managing agent for a couple of months, and it winds up being 20 years that I'm the managing agent. The reason why it's important and very good for me as a lawyer to also act as a managing agent is it gives me a different perspective and a way of looking at things that many times as an attorney, I would not have seen these problems and these difficulties with the same view as a managing agent. What I can say is that the state of the managing agents today with co-ops is it's a disgrace. A lot of managing agents have been getting swallowed up by hedge funds. They've been merging. The hedge fund model is to buy 10 or 12 companies, merge the accounting departments, and everything will get done cheaper. Well, it doesn't get done faster. And I've found that many of the management companies today simply refuse to respond to requests to confirm information such as the maintenance amount and share count, et cetera. But we'll talk about that more in a little while. Part of my background also, when I was first out of law school, I was working for a gentleman named Franklin Barr, who was a co-op sponsor attorney and did a lot of the conversions in New York City when he was with a firm called Goldstick Weinberger. And if you see a lot of the New York City co-op offering plans, they'll have the Goldstick Weinberger name on the front cover because they did approximately 30 or 40% of the conversions back in the mid-'80s. So I think I'm trying to figure out before today's CLE, I've probably done 1,500 co-op closings. It might be a little more, it might be a little less, a lot of them earlier in my career. But by participating in so many closings, I've really come to understand many of the pitfalls, and hopefully I can get everybody who's viewing today to understand what I would be looking out for as far as due diligence. Now, it goes without saying, I'm a very big fan of co-ops. If you have two equal buildings, one being a condo and one being a co-op, to me, the co-op is the much greater form of ownership, and it's better because if the boiler blows in the 150 unit co-op, you can go to the bank, you can get a loan, you can fix that boiler. With a condo, it's very hard to capitalize and come up with money. There's nothing to collateralize. So I'm a very big fan of co-op ownership, especially for older buildings that are always in need of repair. Now, the topic today is co-op due diligence. And I said to myself, what is co-op due diligence? Well, I'll tell you one thing, it's not. I would never have a client come in my office and tell him or her or tell a couple that they're getting a bad deal. That's not my role. I don't know the market. I don't know the market in a particular community. I know it a little bit better in White Plains because I do manage a co-op there. But aside from that, I would never guess on what a particular unit's value is. That's up to the client. And hopefully the client or clients have gone to a broker and they've done an internet search and they become smart consumers and they know what the market is about. So what is due diligence? Due diligence is really making sure that the client is not going to get hosed and buy an apartment where the maintenance is going to suddenly shoot up, or the building's going to fall apart, or there's going to be some major problem that's not anticipated down the road. So I'm going to break this CLE up into four distinct categories. The first is review of client qualifications. You don't want to spend a lot of time doing due diligence if the client's not going to get past the board and not going to get admitted into the building. Then I'm going to speak briefly about review of the contract and some of the issues that come up with contract review. And then I'm going to spend a big chunk of the CLE reviewing a co-op offering plan because it's so important to understand how that co-op became a co-op, especially since 99% of the co-ops that are out there were converted from a rental building. Very few buildings are built new as a co-op for whatever reason. And then finally, I'm going to speak a little bit about financials because it's very important for us non-accountants to understand a little bit about the financials to make sure we're reading the financial statement correctly and are making sure the client is buying in a financially sound building. Now, apart from all of what I just mentioned, a couple of quick pointers that I'd like to make is no matter how much I review financials, no matter how much I review an offering plan, no matter how much I do a financial colonoscopy of the building, no matter how much I speak to a managing agent, there is certain information I'm not going to be able to find out about. What would that be? Well, I had a situation where a client was purchasing a co-op. I encouraged the client to go to the co-op, find a super. If the super was an older guy, would he let his son or daughter buy there? If it was a younger person, would he allow his brother or sister to buy in the co-op? The client didn't listen to me, and it turns out a couple of days after they closed, they called me up hysterical. There was a woman that suffered from some kind of a mental illness above, who would play the piano from like 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. every single day. They ended up having to spend a lot of money to buy an acoustic material to put on the ceiling. They might have found out about that had they spoken with the super. I've had other situations where a unit is particularly cold because it was just not built right and it's too far away from the boiler. We found that out by finding from the super that it was a design flaw from the time the building was built. Another consideration would be there was a co-op that I represented some folks who were buying. It was right next to the elevator machine room, and every time the elevator went on or off, they heard like a vibration on their bedroom wall. They decided to continue and move forward with the purchase. They too put acoustic material on that wall. So these are some of the things you would get by finding out information from the super. Something else that I've found in my practice is sometimes clients say, gee, we can't find the super. That's not a good sign either. If it's a small building and the super is making a very low salary and he has to leave and drive an hour away to do a construction project or hold a second job, that might be a building where you might have different thoughts about purchasing there if the super is not findable. So look, I could go on and on. Something else the clients have to do is go on to social media and keep their eyes wide open. I had a situation where the financials looked perfect for a building. Everything looked great, but the building was a wreck. It wasn't being cared for because the board didn't want to pay an appropriate super, an assistant super, and a porter, and a lot of the tasks that would normally be taken care of were not getting taken care of. All right, so with that being said, what does it mean, review of client qualifications? Before we start doing due diligence, let's make sure the client is going to pass muster with the building. Now, Westchester County passed a law, I think it was August or September 2021, and it's a law that requires co-op boards to provide an answer upon rejecting a potential applicant or applicants. I'm not going to get into whether or not I agree with the law, but the law is here to stay. It's not going away. And in fact, many of my connections say that this law is going to be passed, or a similar law in New York City within the next 2 years. So what does this mean? This means the co-op board can no longer just deny somebody without giving a reason. They have to give a reason, and that reason better be based on something other than gender, national origin, sexual orientation, things like that. So the Westchester County law, I've put it in our documents here. And what the Westchester County law also does is it requires a co-op to provide sort of a checklist and qualifications that they would be looking for. So if you want to take a look now, scroll down. This is directly taken from the Westchester County law, and this is from my building that I manage, and this is what the board requires, the admissions committee from the board requires in order to approve a person or persons who are buying in this particular building. So they say minimum down payment of 10% plus 10% at contract closing, which means 20%. Means you're not going to get a loan, not going to get approved if you're applying for a loan of 85%. You only want to put down 15%. They want to have a debt to income ratio, and it has here different percentage, 28, 33. Every building has to have this now, and this has to be looked at by you and your client, I would say, before even signing the contract. Because if your client is not going to be anywhere in the ballpark to meet the qualifications of a particular building, don't waste your time of having the client go out, sign the contract, having you do your due diligence, paying you for your due diligence, and then all of a sudden finding out that your client gets rejected after spending thousands of dollars on legal fees, application fees, appraisal fees, etc. So I think that's one aspect of the Westchester County law that I do agree with, because at least now you know what the parameters are from a building, and you're not relying on somebody telling you, oh, this building, they'll allow you to finance 85%, you only have to put down 15%. I would also say, with all due respect to the realtors out there, do not rely on the realtor to do this with the client. Maybe the realtor can start initially, but you should go through all of these figures with the client and then see, look, if the client's going to be close, you could say to the client, You're about to spend money. We're about to conduct due diligence. Understand this is a toss-up. You may not be accepted. On the flip side, if the client's financial qualifications far exceed what the building is looking for, then the chances are you're going to have an approval. And if the building does deny your clients, they better have a damn good reason for doing so. This is just the application that I use at the building that I manage. It's typical of the applications that are used by various co-ops today throughout Westchester. I have noticed that there's certain applications that get extremely complicated, but generally speaking, most applications, the building wants to see proof of income, tax returns, and things like that. All right, let's talk about the contract briefly. I would assume everybody here utilizes contracts that are readily available from Judicial and the Bar Association. This happens to be a contract that I prefer to use. I think it's an older form, but it's got all the basic information. I like this contract. I also have a rider that we can go through in a moment, but a couple of things that you need to know about the standard contract. The standard contract has the information, and the information better be correct, and that's something that we're going to confirm through a review of the offering plan, as well as confirmation from the building's managing agent. Obviously, the contract has the names of the parties, it has the number of shares, the proprietary lease, etc. A couple of points that I want to make, though, is if you go to paragraph 5, paragraph 5 says that you, the buyer, and of course the buyer is buying through the attorney, has made a good review of the corporate documents, and you're happy with the corporate bylaws and the way the co-op is running. You can't sign a contract and then get out of the contract later because you decide the building is going to have a huge maintenance increase, or there's something else you don't like about the corporate makeup of the building. Another important paragraph here that sometimes people lose sight of is paragraph 6, which states that the sale is subject to the unconditional consent of the corporation. What does that mean? Well, if a co-op admissions committee says we're going to approve Mr. and Mrs. Jones for purchase of this particular unit, provided they put 6 months worth of maintenance payments into escrow, then that's not an unconditional approval. And you can get your clients out of the deal if they don't have the money, or they simply don't want to tie up 6 months worth of maintenance payments with the co-op indefinitely. So that's something that needs to be kept in mind, that it is a contract which requires unconditional approval. Something else that's important to note is it says here, purchaser shall in good faith submit to the corporation, the application, blah, 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 blah. And then in 6.2.2, it says, very important, purchaser must attend and cause any proposed occupant to attend. So even if there's only one person that's going to be on the stock and lease, if they're disclosed that they're living with somebody else in the unit, they have to attend one or more personal interviews. And that's important. I had a couple that I represented, and this is many years ago, but not more than 10 or 12 years ago. It was a gay couple. We were convinced that the co-op board was giving them a hard time and called them back for a second, and then wanted to call them back for a third interview. Clients didn't want to go to the third interview, and I said, no, you must submit to the third interview before I can start writing letters that it amounts to harassment. They did get accepted by the building, but they wanted to jump because they felt they were being singled out. I've had very few co-ops want more than one interview, but it can happen. So that's it for the rest of the contract. Standard information says the closing is going to be held at the transfer agent's office. Many times that's also the attorney for the co-op. And then I put a rider. It's all self-explanatory. You guys could take a look at it after the CLE is over. Next, I have
Matt, before we move to the next thing,
yeah.
I had two similar questions about the transparency laws and New York City. They're saying that it's been proposed in the city, but it's died. Do you have any more information, or do you have any comments on co-op transparency in New York City?
Sure.
Thank
So
you.
Yesterday I was on the phone, and by the way, my knowledge about co-ops pales in comparison to the professionals that I deal with. One of which is Ronald Shear, who through his firm Himmel, Farb & Shear, he's converted many of the buildings in Westchester County, and he's still around practicing, and he's going strong. But yesterday I was on the phone with a gentleman named Carl Cesarano. Carl is a longtime friend. I've known him for 30 years, and Carl represents, it's got to be close to 300 buildings. So he is the accounting firm that does the audits for 300 buildings. I don't know how he gets it done. He has a staff of 8 or 10 people. But Carl and I were talking yesterday, and he said that his connections all seem to be on the same page, that the co-op transparency law is coming. Whether it gets done in this next legislative session or 2 sessions down the road, it is coming. And there's been a lot of talk that there hasn't been that much pushback from the Westchester law. And it's funny, I have mixed feelings on it. I have a lot of people that say the law is terrible, but I've had a lot of people that say the law is terrific because it's causing everybody to move quickly. So that's my inside track, is that Carl Cesarano says it's happening, and it's happening within 2 years. And he represents a lot of buildings. He goes to a lot of these sessions, and he certainly knows a lot more about it than I do. But I think it is coming. Whether it's coming in 6 months or a year or 2 years, I think it's coming. Okay, getting back to what I have up on the screen now is the offering plan for the building that I manage. This is typical of virtually all the offering plans that were put together at that time. As you can see, this plan was first used 1983, September 15th, and it was going to be outdated if not amended and so forth by 1984. So in this particular instance, this is a building that I manage. It's 165 units. The original law firm was, it's now Sir Tailman. I forget the current iteration, but that law firm is still around. They did a lot of the conversions in Westchester and in the city. So this is a typical co-op offering plan. I've had lawyers admit to me that they haven't reviewed the offering plan, that they get it as a thumb drive, that they get it as a PDF, they just forward it to the client. I think it's a disgrace. You need to review the offering plan. There's stuff in there that you really need to know, and you need to be able to convey this in a proper manner to your clients. I can peruse through the offering plans. I mean, I know what I'm looking for. It's going to take you an hour or two, and you have to build that into your price when you're representing a client, but it is very, very important. And I'm going to go through a couple of the reasons why it's important. So usually the first page in the bound book, it just gives you a summary. The amount of shares here is 66,604, 165 apartments. Can you believe the original purchase price, 12 million? If you had to sell the apartments today, it would probably be like 40 or 50 million. Then you have a table of contents. And after the table of contents, you have the introduction. And a lot of this was required by the rules that were promulgated by the Department of Law way back when. And it talks about, what you're going to be doing, how the co-op ownership came about. It then gives a summary, in this case, 159 residential apartments, 7 professional offices. And then it goes on. Now here, very important. This is one of the first sections that I review when I go through a co-op offering plan. If you look at page 4, it has the building. I'm not going to switch the screen around, but it has each unit laid out. It says the number of rooms, number of bathrooms, and number of shares. Very, very important that you confirm this information for the following reason. I had a lawsuit in which a client purchased it. It happened to be a condo, but very similar to a co-op. She had a lawyer. The lawyer didn't really do his job. And somebody had illegally put a wall up and cut the apartment, which was a weirdly configured 1-bedroom, and cut it into a 2-bedroom. She thought she was buying a 2-bedroom. She was paying all cash. There were no checks and balances. She paid hundreds of thousands of dollars more than the comparable 1-bedroom, and she didn't find out it was not a 2-bedroom until she went to make some renovations down the road, and the managing agent stopped her, and she had to file permits with New York City DOB, and it became a nightmare. So you want to always check the room count. Here it says number of rooms and number of bathrooms. If somebody's slipped in an extra bathroom, it's rare, but it happens. You need to confirm. So this is the first thing you want to do, is confirm the number of shares and confirm the bedroom count and bathroom count. And you want to write that down. We're going to have a belt and suspenders additional check by confirming that information with the co-op managing agent. And if there's any difference, we have to figure out why. Sometimes the managing agent is wrong. Sometimes, very rarely, we've had a couple of times where the book was amended because upon the first publishing of the offering plan, the bedroom count or the bathroom count or the share count was wrong. And this is how they originally break up the building from a rental building. They have to make a share assessment so that all the shares add up to the number of shares that are in the offering plan. All right, let's scroll down a little further. Okay, so when it says here footnotes to Schedule A, This is just a rehash of the apartment layouts, and it's basically cover where the sponsor, the person who's brought this to the Attorney General's office, is covering themselves, trying to give as much information about the building as possible. Now you have a projected budget. Now you don't have to review this. This budget is blown to smithereens. Who the heck cares about a budget from 40 years ago? So you can scroll through any of the budgetary items because they're completely irrelevant 30 years down the road. What is important is you can take a look here. They have a projected number of gallons used of oil. Now, in this particular building, the building is converted from burning oil to burning gas. That's not in the offering plan, but you can get an idea. You can get a question to the managing agent or the super, hey, do you still burn oil? A lot of buildings in the city, we have these new local laws which are requiring buildings to become much more environmentally friendly. But here you can get an idea as to how many gallons was burned way back when. Hopefully the boilers have been updated. Hopefully they're getting a much better economy at this point. You talk about electricity and gas. Again, the prices are way out of whack, but a lot of these things here still count. They have, for example, a service contract. They talk about elevator exterminator, water treatment. Those are all still viable service contracts. Master antenna contract, that went out the window years ago. Nobody has regular TV anymore. The antennas on the roofs were abandoned long ago. Talks about insurance. This is all important stuff to go through just to have a flavor for what some of the expenses that the building is going to be incurring are. And then, of course, we have workman's compensation, disability, and wages, management fee. Everything here is outdated, but you're still going to have those same costs today. Now, if we scroll down, changes in prices and units. When the original offering plan is filed, the sponsor has to file an amendment to change the prices of apartments, and therein we get to the amendments that are filed. In this particular building, there were 36 or 37 amendments filed before the need to file amendments became obsolete because the sponsor no longer has any units in the building. So we have here, this is an opinion from a real estate company talking about verifying the information that was said previous. Same thing with the accountant. And then you have here a statement of income and expenses for the year 1981-82. We don't care. Income tax deduction, that's a typical letter that's in the offering plan that says that the apartment will qualify under IRS regulations to allow the portion of maintenance charges allocated to taxes to be deductible by the individual shareholders. And this is all just standard gobbledygook. Rights of existing tenants. Many of the buildings that were converted subject to tenants that were protected either by ETPA in the suburbs or by rent control or rent stabilization laws in the city. Many of these tenants, of course, have died or moved on. Trying to think what else here is important. We should move down to let's go all the way down to page. Okay, let's go to page, I think it's 97. Part 2 is the actual offering statement. And this is, of course, when the original sponsor was selling units. All of this is outdated. You can scroll through this. None of this really counts at this point because we're talking about a resale. This is kind of important. We're now here where it says apartment conversion report. And this is an engineer's report talking about the building and the facilities as they existed when the building was converted. The reason why this is important is you want to see if they're talking about asbestos, if they're talking about lead paint, if they're talking about outdated windows. You want to see how many of those improvements have been made over the past 40 years. And again, you want to make sure your clients have come into this transaction with eyes that are wide open and make sure they're looking. At this point, I can't imagine that virtually every building that's out there has not had their windows changed. Windows are a big problem with lead paint because every time a window goes up and down, if it was an old-fashioned wooden window or an old-fashioned steel window, casement type window, every time they're opening and closing, they could be putting out lead paint dust. I know of one situation where someone purchased an apartment that had been resold many times from the original sponsor. They purchased the apartment, they moved away, they rented out the unit, and they were then cited for renting out a unit with lead paint problems. So that's a consideration to discuss with clients. But again, they got to use their own eyes, and they need to make sure that if there are old windows in the apartment, they check to their satisfaction that the windows don't contain any lead. Now, I've received many questions as to whether or not somebody should use a home inspector prior to purchasing a co-op. And my answer to that one depends. I would think that any of the major systems from the walls in are the unit owner's responsibilities, such as the sink and the refrigerator and the dishwasher. And it's easy enough to see if those items work without having to spend money on a home inspector. However, in a smaller co-op building, it may be very well worth the client's while to pay an engineer or an inspector, or even get an off-duty superintendent to check out the systems. If you have a 20 or 30 unit co-op, and we do have some of those in Westchester, and the boiler breaks, and that $100,000 is going to be spread over 20 or 30 units, it's a big expenditure. So you may want to have, prior to signing a contract, have an engineer check the roof, check the boiler, speak to the superintendent, speak in super language so that they can get a flavor as to what's been done and what needs to be done. If a building that your client is buying into has the need to have a new roof installed and a new boiler, and they need to do concrete work, and they need to fix their garage, and they need to fix their doors, chances are the maintenance payments are going to go up substantially. Otherwise, how is the money going to come about to pay for these improvements? So getting back to what's on the screen, you can look through the report that was prepared back when the building was converted. It talks about the building being constructed in 1939. So if somebody's buying that building today, that's 85 years ago. It's a long time ago, and that's why it's important to make sure maintenance has been kept up. Sometimes the offering plan will discuss items that need to be repaired, and then you want to check the amendments to the offering plan to see whether those repairs were undertaken. I have not, for purposes of keeping this this attachment from being 300 pages, I've not included the amendments to this particular building's offering plan, but you have to read through the amendments and see. Many of the amendments are simple one-page amendments where the sponsor's talking about units that were sold, but in other instances, the amendments talk about different projects that were undertaken even long after the sponsor has relinquished control of the building. So this gives you a good, it's nice to talk to the clients and say, hey, we read it. It's six-story buildings, even if you've never been to the building. And it talks about the layout, and it talks about utilities, and it talks about gas. Something that's interesting and should be noted is that a lot of the older co-ops built in the 20s and the 30s don't have adequate electrical service. Today, I think the gold standard is you want to have 100 amp service coming into the apartments. If you don't have that, your client might have problems powering all of their electrical devices that we use today in a modern home, refrigerators, a million iPads for kids, air conditioners, and that's something that the clients need to understand. If the service coming into the building is only 40 amps, they could have an electrical problem down the road with not enough juice coming into the apartment. This talks about landscaping, enclosures, subsoil conditions, building size, but all of the offering plans have this same similar assessment by an engineer or an architect to talk about the building. Now, the building could be falling apart. If you don't read it, you don't really know. Here it talks about the chimneys, structural systems, and exterior entrances, service entrances, roof structures, etc. It explains here, very important, there's no fire escapes because on the interior stairs, there's two means of exit from all of the buildings serviced by interior stairs. Elevators, it's important to, when you're reading through an offering plan of a building that was converted 30 or 40 years ago, have the elevators been modernized and updated? There are still a lot of buildings out there where the buildings don't have elevators that were modernized, and it means that the elevators sometimes don't level up, and it causes trip and fall hazards, and it can cause a problem with the building's insurance. So insurance doesn't want to insure buildings where there's trip and fall hazards. And you have to be careful if buildings get, there's an insurance crisis out there today. If a building loses its insurance, the new insurance that could be passed through would be sometimes double. There's a co-op, I believe in New Rochelle, that had a fire. I don't know if it was a major fire, but it was a fire enough to the point that the insurance went from $300,000 or $400,000 a year to almost $1 million a year. That's a consideration that you might not find that out from the offering plan and from the and from the amendments, but that's a good time to go on social media. I'm sure that the building that had a fire, it's going to be all over social media or even in the regular media if you do a Google search. This also talks about plumbing, talks about the fact that there's no air conditioning, talks about the fact that the Con Edison, ventilation, electrical. I could go on and on, but I think you get the idea here. So this is something you got to read. You may want to flag it. I like to give the offering plans to the clients many times before the closing and say, here, you guys take a look at it. And I make a summary and I say, hey, page, from page 79 to 97 talks about the physical condition of the building. The other sections talk about the number of shares, et cetera. Now, here's a pretty good layout of the building showing the helicopter view, and it shows the six-story buildings along with the 2 garages. And this is nice because the client can sort of ascertain where their unit's going to be located in regards to the entirety of the building. Okay, proprietary lease. Every co-op building has a proprietary lease, which allows clients to occupy the unit. It's also showing that they have a certain amount of shares pursuant to a share certificate. This proprietary lease has been modified, but not in major ways. So the most important aspects of the proprietary lease that you want to read is you want to see when it expires. And when you send a letter to the managing agent, which we're going to talk about, you want to make sure that the proprietary lease has a expiration date that exceeds the amount of a 30-year loan. So here it says that the proprietary lease expires in 2060, or in 2024. We're getting to the point where we want to extend that proprietary lease, because if the bank sees a proprietary lease expires around 30 years or only a few years thereafter, they're going to want to see an extension prior to granting a loan on the building. So the proprietary lease just has the name of the co-op corporation, the name of the buyers, and then it goes on and talks about the different requirements. It's no different than a regular lease. And then we probably go here towards the end. You have the signature page. Many of the managing agents and attorneys have modified the proprietary leases from when the building was originally converted. So they have it now in their computer, and they can just hit a few buttons, change a few names, and spit out a new proprietary lease. Of course, at the closing, one original proprietary lease goes to the managing agent and the other goes to the client. Or if the client is getting a loan, it goes to the bank along with the stock certificate as the required collateral for the loan. So the rest of this is just standard. Okay, house rules. Many times house rules have been modified. In this case, they have been modified when you send a letter to the managing agent and when you're gathering your documents from the seller's attorney. You want to make sure you have a set of updated house rules, and you want to peruse the house rules to make sure there's nothing in there that's crazy. And you want to give the house rules to your client to make sure your client's not planning on doing something that's violative of the house rules. Now we have bylaws. Bylaws are probably the least important set of documents to give to the client. The bylaws govern how the building is to be run and how the board is to be comprised, and length of time for board members, et cetera, quorum, how they call the annual meetings, and so forth. But it is still a good idea to take a look at the bylaws. Many times they've been amended. You can ask the managing agent if the bylaws have been amended in a way that would be important for your client to know. I've also found that many times if I have a question regarding bylaws, I call the attorney for the building, and usually I can get a few questions in. I'm not going to spend 25 minutes on the phone with the attorney, but many times attorneys for co-ops will pick up the phone, return your call, and go over aspects of the building that they feel are important. Now, let's see here. Okay, we talked a little bit about review of the offering plan. Let's talk about confirming information with the managing agent. So this is a form that most attorneys have never seen. This is a standard Fannie Mae Freddie Mac co-op project questionnaire. As a managing agent, I get these all the time when somebody's looking to buy in the building that I manage. And the reason why this is an important document is, years ago, before the first mortgage meltdown back in 2006, 2007, it was pretty easy to get a co-op loan. Then everything tightened up. Now it's gotten even worse. They ask a lot of questions. Sometimes they're relevant, sometimes they're dumb. And this co-op project information questionnaire is something that every single lender sends out. One of the things you can do as an attorney as part of your due diligence is you can find out if the building has already been approved by a particular lender. So you can call a mortgage broker, or if your client already has a mortgage broker, call their mortgage broker and say, look, we're about to do a deal at this building. It's located at 90 Bryant Avenue. Is it on an approved list? And hopefully the answer is yes, because if the building is on an approved list, that means Chase or HSBC, or in this case, United Wholesale Mortgage, has approved the building and will give loans in the building. Now, they're still going to want this questionnaire to confirm the amount of maintenance and the shares allocated to the unit that they're about to give a loan on. But at least the general picture is, if they've been approved and they're on an approved list, the client's not going to reinvent the wheel with the mortgage broker trying to jump through hoops getting the building approved. There are some buildings that are not approved. Either their financials are questionable. I've had certain mortgage brokers tell me that if a bank lends too many in a particular unit, like if Chase has 80 loans in a 100-unit building, they're not going to give any more loans there. That's just their internal policy. So here, what they want to know is the name of the co-op corporation. They want to know the taxpayer ID number. Is it qualify for the deductions under the IRS Rule 216? And then they have a lot of questions. They want to make sure it's not in some kind of a temporary housing situation. They want to make sure it's a real co-op, make sure it's done, make sure it's fully built. They want to ask for the number of shares. They want to ask when the last financial statement was filed. They want to ask information about the underlying mortgage. Now, as an attorney representing somebody who's buying in a building, it's very important for you to understand what's going on with the underlying mortgage. Virtually every co-op has an underlying mortgage, and that mortgage many times is on a balloon. In this instance, when I last refinanced this building, we refinanced to a fully amortizing loan that in 9 years is paid off and done. And this building will be very happy. The maintenance could potentially go down by 25 or 30%. But that's not the case with most co-op buildings. Most co-ops have a underlying mortgage that's due every 10 years as a balloon. And it's going to be very important to explain to the client that if the maintenance on, let's say, a 2-bedroom unit now is $1,100 or $1,200, but their mortgage is coming due in 2 years, we know the interest rates are probably going to be a lot higher than, in this case, 4%. So if they're going from 4% to 7% in 2 years, chances are the maintenance is going to go up significantly, even if the building doesn't require any additional capital improvements. So it's extremely important to find out from the managing agent information pertaining to the underlying mortgage. If the managing agent is non-responsive, you can find out information about the existing mortgage by reviewing the last few years' financials, and the accountant, usually, we'll get to that in a few minutes, the accountant usually has a footnote describing and explaining the last time the mortgage was refinanced. So this is going to be a big factor, because I would hate to represent a client, not delve into the underlying mortgage a little bit, have the maintenance at $1,200 and have them call you up screaming in 7 months because they just refinanced the mortgage and the maintenance went to $1,500. So this is a big factor. Nothing goes down. Taxes, insurance, operating costs, fuel, everything's going up. So the clients need to understand maintenance is not going to stay the same. It's a very much of a renter's mentality to think that costs are not going to go up. In this building that I manage, we just raised the maintenance by 3.5%, and I was a little upset because I thought it should have gone up more. All of the costs went up more than 3.5%, but the board did everybody a favor, and because the building has a lot of money, the board felt it was inappropriate to raise the maintenance more than that. So you're not going to see this form, but if you call your mortgage broker and your mortgage broker gets this form, you could take a look at it. The problem is the contract's already going to be signed. This form's not going to come out until after the contract's signed and after the client has applied for a mortgage. You could try to get it in advance, but most managing agents won't deal with you at all until they get a check. And, so this is probably more of an issue where you can look through the financials and maybe call the accountant for the building. So this is a form, like I said.
Hey, Matt, I'm just going to interrupt you for one second to give the course code, if you don't mind. The course code is flip tax. The course code is flip tax. I will type it in the chat right now as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That's something else you really need to know when representing. Thank you, Diana. Does the building have a flip tax? There's two sides to that coin. A flip tax, when somebody's getting ready to sell and they find out, I've got to pay $4,000 or $5,000 to the building. It's going to be a headache. It's cutting into my profits. But on the other side, a flip tax can help to keep the maintenance down. So there's two sides to that coin, like I said. Something else on this form that raises an issue is insurance information. Sometimes if your client's going to be getting insurance, they can reach out to the insurance company for the building and find out who they recommend for somebody to obtain a co-op owner's type policy of insurance. Co-op owner's insurance is usually very inexpensive, but you want to make sure you get a decent policy. All right, let's cruise through this. Now here's just a letter. This is just a simple letter that I try to send out to managing agents just to give me, I don't want to torture them. And when they see a letter where an attorney requests something, it's longer than one page, they usually don't respond. But I just try to get some of the basic information. How many shares, which I should know from the Irving plan. Is there an assessment? When is it going to end? Is there a flip tax? Who's the application? Where are closing held? These are all some basic questions. Parking, I don't even know if I have it on here. Parking is a big issue. Clients are going to hate you if you represent them and they buy in a building and they find out there's a 6-year wait list for parking. So you really need to find out about parking and pets. Those are, very important issues. All right, let's talk about financials here and review of a financial statement. So as mentioned earlier, this is year-end financials that are done, audited by Cesarano and Khan. Carl Cesarano, like I said, represents close to 300 buildings. His year-end financials are terrific. And they're set up in a way that an average layperson can understand, and they're really easy to understand. I don't know, a few years ago, I was talking to an attorney. He said, oh, there's an opinion from the Attorney General that it's not appropriate for a lawyer to review financials. That's hogwash. It's absolutely appropriate for you as an attorney and for your client to take a look at the independent auditor's report, year-end financials. The reason why is this is done by a professional exactly for the purpose of letting people take a look and get a snapshot as to the building's financial situation. All right, the first thing you want to take a look at in any set of financials is you want to read the opinion section. It's very, very important because if an accountant doesn't want to be disloyal to his client, he doesn't have to be disloyal to his client, but in the opinion section, they can really tone it down. Here, it is meaningful that he said, here, the accountants say, we've audited the accompanying financial statements, blah, blah, blah. They referred to present fairly in all material respects. That's important. That's really important because you know you can rely on this and they're not hedging at all. Moving down to where it says basis for opinion, it says that they've conducted audits in accordance with auditing standards generally accepted, blah, blah, blah. I didn't know this, but the accounting standards are extremely tight. In fact, they send to Carl Cesarano and his firm, they send accountants in there every couple of years to go through all of their books and records to make sure they're doing everything the right way. Every single check that's written by a co-op gets taken by the accountants front and back. They go through everything up, down, left, right, north, south. So when you are reading these reports, you can rely on the information that's contained there. It would also be important here to take a look at page 3. Where is it? Assets. Here it is. Okay, very important to take a look at the listing here of assets. If you go through this, you could see Capital One Bank and comparing year to year, 2022 to year 2021. You could see what's in the operating account at the time they did the audit. There's several accounts. I happen to know in this because there's an account for escrow for people that were required to pay maintenance in advance, et cetera. But if you add up, you've got Capital One, 17,000, 30,000, 24,000, 11,000. Then you have here money market. You have escrow for taxes and insurance, 100,000. You got money market, 560,000. So you could see you have a tremendous amount of assets here. And 1 year over the next, it turns out there was a tax certiorari. That's why the number's higher. What doesn't make sense, and what to me is not real, and it's accounting mumbo jumbo, is where they say a little bit further down, land, buildings, improvements, net of accumulated depreciation. Depreciation is one of those terms of art that the accountants use. That means nothing to me, but I like to know how much money is in the bank. Is the building broke? You can get a calculator, and if the building has $100,000 and there's 200 units, you know that $500 per unit is not a sufficient amount of reserves, and they're either going to have to raise the maintenance or come up with another way to come up with additional money. Another aspect of the financial statements, which is kind of ridiculous to me, is where you come down towards the bottom of the page where it says total stockholders' equity, $728,419. The year before was $480,000. These are just, again, accounting ways of showing equity. The reality is the building is probably worth 40 or $50 million, some crazy amount, and that 728,000 is net of depreciation and all kinds of accounting mumbo jumbo requirements. Now, if you go to the next page, this will give you a pretty good snapshot as to what the maintenance is and how much the maintenance has gone up year to year. And you could see here $2.24 million for 22 and $2,226,000. So it went up by $25,000. Not a lot considering this is a 165 unit building. The exemptions, I wouldn't know this if I didn't know it, but that has to do with the star exemption because some of the shareholders still get the maintenance reduced by the amount of star. And then you could see at the end of the day, this building has more revenue than just the maintenance charges. They take in an extra chunk of money for parking. They have a cell tower on the roof, laundry, storage, interest from investments, application fees, etc. So that's how you come up to the total revenue, which is a lot higher than the initial $2,249,000. It goes up to $769,000. So it's a lot more money. Now you can see the expenses, and you can see again, nothing goes down, everything goes up. Wages went up, payroll taxes, everything went up year to year. But you can see where the money is going. Where is the biggest chunk of money going? You can tell your clients, hey, in this building, it looks like the biggest chunk of money is going to pay the mortgage, or the biggest chunk of money in this building is going to pay for wages because they seem to have a lot of staff members. So when you add everything up, this is very important. Where you see this excess, look at the very bottom of the page where it says excess of revenue over expenses. That's a positive number. Now you can see 1 year was $77,691. The next year was $179,000. It's extremely important that this be a positive number, because if this is not a positive number, nobody's going to lend or give a loan or give a mortgage to your clients in this building. I shouldn't say nobody. If this is a negative number, it's just going to raise a red flag, and the lender's going to want to know why. Why was the number so low in 1 year? Was there a particular big problem? And we can sometimes find that out by reviewing the rest of the financial statements. If you want to turn the page, what I find to be very, very important is, go to page 7, cash flows from operating activities. This is pretty good. This explains a summary of the cash in and cash out. And then what I really find to be the most helpful for many of these year-end financials are the notes. And the notes talk about how did the building become a co-op? How many units is it if you look at the top? Date of management review, summary of significant accounting policies. Well, that's all really accounting mumbo jumbo. Talks about investments. If you come down about 3/4 of the way, it talks about investments. When you're a co-op, you're not allowed to invest in risky investments. The investments have to be very safe, but in turn, they're not going to kick off a lot of interest. You want to come down here. The next page, the notes continue for several pages. It talks about the investments towards the bottom here on page 9. Now, very important here on paragraph 6, mortgage note payable. This talks about what the mortgage, the underlying mortgage of the co-op is. And it says here in 2017, the co-op got a new mortgage with Citizens Bank, formerly Investors Bank. It's going to be in the principal amount of blah, blah, blah. And it's a 15-year term, fully amortizing. So like I said earlier, at the end of this payment period, which is another 9 years, this building will not have an underlying mortgage. There is a line of credit, but the line of credit has been used and is going to be paid back shortly. So I think something else that's important to take a look at is if we go to income taxes. Generally speaking, co-ops don't pay income taxes. One of the unique things is if a co-op acquires a unit from a unit owner who didn't pay their maintenance, or if they buy units from a unit owner who's selling, or they get units from a sponsor. If they buy those units, let's say for $100,000, hold on to them to 5, 6, 7, 10 years and sell it for $300,000, there's no capital gains or income tax consequences. The accountants are able to call it a recapitalization of stock, so there's no tax consequences. That's a great way for many buildings to take additional income in without having to pay taxes on it. And then it's very important here, at least, to see multi-employer plan. Most co-ops that have more than one employee are going to be union, and they're going to be subject to 32 BJ in the city or 32 BJ North in Westchester. The union, I have mixed feelings about the union. The union gives the workers an ability to have a nice pension and health insurance. It doesn't pay them a whole heck of a lot. Without a union, I've seen it firsthand. Boards can be vindictive. Somebody can look at them the wrong way. They could fire someone. So it's generally a lot more difficult to fire a member of the union than a non-union employee. If you come down here to repairs, maintenance, and supplies, you could see that here they break out exactly what items of repairs were done, and it gives somebody a good indication as to see whether or not a building is being properly maintained. And again, the most important thing for somebody to take a look at is to have their eyes wide open, walk around the building, and see exactly how the maintenance of the building is taking place. So now that's the offering plan, and that's a summary. You're going to have to spend the time going through it. What else do we like to do? Well, we like to review minutes. People, generally speaking, in Westchester are a little bit less likely to review minutes. In my position as managing agent of the building, I'd say maybe 5% of the time, purchasers' attorneys review minutes. It seems to be more of something that's done in the city. I like to review minutes when they're available. What does that mean? So you go into the managing agent's office, assuming they're going to allow you to review minutes, and you make an appointment and you review minutes for the past couple of years for the building to see if there are any extraordinary events that are going to occur that might cause the maintenance to increase significantly, or you can see if there's problems with an individual unit. When somebody makes a complaint about their unit, I'm always careful to tell them once it's reduced to writing and it's put in minutes, that could come back to haunt someone. So they have to be very careful about what they do reduce to writing. What do I mean? Well, let's say there's a terrible problem with a unit continuing to have water problems, or having a flood from a neighbor upstairs, or a noise problem. When they go to sell, it could be difficult because somebody who reviews the minutes is going to see that. Noise problems are perhaps the most difficult problems to cure, because if you have somebody living on top of you or somebody living beneath you and they claim you're making noise or you claim they're making noise, it's very hard to resolve those problems in an older building, since most older buildings have wood framing and they're not concrete framing. So what do I like to do? When I go in to look at the minutes, I like to see how organized the minutes are. Who's taking the minutes? Is it taken by the managing agent, or is it taken by a board member? Something that's an old trick that boards do is when they want to talk about something that they don't want to reveal or have open to the public, they review minutes, and they then open up a session called executive session, where they then say they're going to talk about a sensitive subject, and that's not going to be reduced to a writing. That's going to be viewable by somebody taking a look at minutes. So you have to keep that in mind and understand that minutes are not going to be the most incredible way of getting information about a co-op. I think, again, going in with your eyes wide open, making sure that the client does some social media review and understands a little bit more about the building that way, combined with your review of the offering plan and combined with all of the other things that we've discussed. That way you can have a pretty good indication as to whether or not the client is going to be buying in a building. The most horrifying thing for me is getting a call, and it's not happened, luckily. My maintenance went way up. You didn't do a good job reviewing this building. I've never had a call like that, and I want to keep it that way. That's why I want to continue to do my due diligence, and hopefully I will be able to come up with a good picture. Going to the super, I cannot stress enough how important that is. Finding out if the building is well maintained, reviewing the offering plan, all of these things combined create for a good set of due diligence. The sad part about it is we can't charge the clients anywhere near what we should be charging. It's very hard on a $300,000 purchase to charge somebody $5,000 or $6,000 because we have to compete with other lawyers that are charging less. But you can at least let the client know that by coming with you, you're going to be doing enough due diligence to give them a much better idea as to whether or not this is going to be a nice, long-standing purchase. With that said, I think I'm just about done. Are there questions? Are there going to be questions and answers here?
Yes, we have quite a few questions. I'm going to
Okay.
try to get through them quickly for lecture purposes. If
Sure.
you are on a timeline and you need to go, the official lecture is over, but we have a lot of good questions, so please feel free to stay on. So just because you were just talking about the minutes, somebody was asking how far back in the minutes do you think you should go?
It all depends. If the minutes are a disaster, I've gone in where they have book after book, year after year, and they're easy. Go back a couple of years, make notes about how far back you're going. I think if you're there already, how long does it take? It depends how thick the minutes are. I would go back 4 years, 3-4 years.
Okay. So let's go back to offering plans. What do you do when there is a co-op with a very old offering plan, or it's a conversion and they don't have layouts? And one other question was amendments to the offering plan. So no offering plan, no layout, or you can't find the amendments.
Okay, so no offering plan, that's not possible. There has to be an offering plan. There are certain buildings, 213 co-ops, which are, I mean, there has to be an offering plan. If there's not an offering plan, there has to be a good reason why it's not available. You can get it from doing a FOIL request, but that's going to take months. So what's the reason? There has to be an offering plan. I very rarely, I mean, I did represent somebody who purchased without an offering plan. There was a good reason for it. So I can't believe there's no offering plan. What I have had is through the years, the managing agent loses 1 or 2 amendments. And on that one, you just try to read the amendments before and after. But I don't think there's a situation where there's no offering plan. There had better be a really good reason. And you have to be very careful in those circumstances. The next thing you said, no layout. You mean no layout or configuration showing the apartment dimensions? And if that's the question, yeah, you got to just have your clients look, open their eyes. It's usually pretty easy to tell if a wall was put up after the fact. You can ask the super if the other units are configured the same way. In my book, there are apartment configuration layouts. So if there's not a layout, you have to put your radar up and say, gee, why is there not a layout? And ask for maybe the super or somebody that knows what they're doing to tell you if the layout is similar with other apartments. What was the next question, Diana?
What do you recommend for diligence on co-ops that's on a ground lease? Have you had any of these in Westchester?
No, that would be, well, I shouldn't have been, I wasn't really practicing, but several years ago, I helped somebody in Florida who was subject to a ground lease. It was a disaster because every year that goes by that the ground lease comes due, the value of the unit goes down. So no, the answer is I've had no experience in New York with it. And to me, it would be extremely problematic, although everything in Battery Park City is on a ground lease, but I think a ground lease is 100 years and they keep extending it. So the answer is I don't know.
Is there testing available for lead paint like there is for asbestos?
Sure. So, every contract that I've seen for co-ops has that lead paint form that we many times ignore. But if you have a concern of lead paint, by all means, I think you can go in and test if the seller will let you test. Sometimes the seller might be nervous and say, gee, if Mr. Buyer number 1 tests and they find lead and he walks away, do I have to disclose that to buyer number 2? But you could test for lead paint. The most problematic areas are the windows, doors, anything where wood rubs against each other to make for the lead dust.
Do you suggest a risk assessment memo?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by risk assessment memo?
I'm not sure. It's not clear. It does not clear. So I'll dismiss that one for now, unless the person who asked the question
They
wants
could
to
email you or
hop
email
in.
me. I'm happy to help.
Yeah. How do you ascertain if a sufficient amount of money is on hand by the co-op?
Good question.
And also with that being said, somebody had mentioned that they use somebody, a CPA to review offering plans and financials. Do you suggest maybe, getting a CPA to look at the financials, for you?
Good question. No, I'm happy. I mean, if you have a CPA that is a family member that's going to do it quickly without charging too much, sure. I think that's a great way to make sure the financials meet with your approval. What was the other part of the question?
How do you know if a co-op has enough money or a good enough reserve? How do you ascertain that? Is there a
Okay.
formula or?
So there's no formula. So what you got to look at, you have to say, okay, if the roofs were done, if brick pointing is regularly done, if the boilers were converted, if oil, you have to see if enough capital improvements were done, then you can have less money in the reserves. There used to be a rule that says if you have $2,000 per unit, that might be enough, but that's a very loose number. I wouldn't be comfortable with $2,000 per unit if a lot of stuff needs to be done. But if they just did the windows, they just did the boilers, they removed the oil tanks, they did the asbestos, they did everything else, that might be enough. I would say some buildings just don't have enough money. Clients don't understand that, and the maintenance is going to go up, and or there's going to be assessments. I'm proud to say in my building, I've never hit anybody with an assessment, but sometimes people are under the false impression that assessments go away. And a lot of times they don't go away. The price of oil is high now for the past couple of years. It's not going down. So there's no precise formula. But if you go to the building that's well maintained and they have a couple of $100,000 in reserves, that might be enough.
Yeah, your friend Ron is popping in and he's saying 3 months of maintenance charges.
Who's saying that?
Ron was popping
You know what?
in.
I defer to Mr. Shear. He knows far more about this than I do. But if he's saying that would be a good number. Thank you, Ron.
Let me go through. We'll just get to one or two quick questions because we're hitting the time. Ooh. Are co-ops getting more liberal with allowing shares to be owned by a trust?
Oh, it's so funny. They should ask that. Yes. Years ago, every single attorney, Ron Shear included, had a preconceived notion that transfer to a trust was not proper or allowed. And now he allows it. And I'd say 95% of the co-op attorneys allow it. They want to make sure the trust is properly set up, and they want to make sure there's going to be money to pay there and some responsible party. But yeah, they're allowing transfers to trusts. I'm not saying it's quick, but yeah, they allow that to take place all the time now.
Okay, I'm just going to get to one last question. And if we didn't get to your question, just shoot me an email and I will send it over to Matt. How do you, let me scroll back up to that question. When conducting due diligence, how do you keep a record of your review, your notes and your findings, just to cover your what?
I have a junky yellow pad. I put my notes on a yellow pad, and believe it or not, I'm careful about how much I put in writing to the client because you better make sure it's going to remain accurate. In the example that I gave, an attorney, put down that he reviewed the offering plan and checked everything. It was with a condo, but he specifically put in writing that he checked it out and it was a 2-bedroom, and it turns out it wasn't. So I would make scratch notes. I usually like to do this on the phone or in person, but I don't keep my notes afterwards. Maybe that's to my detriment, but I want to do a good job for the client and really make sure that it's a 2-bedroom, make sure that the number of shares is accurate and things like that. But for everything else, it's enough for me to peruse through, make my notes, and then I throw my notes out afterwards.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. We had a really nice turnout. We had over close to 500 attorneys on today, which is very impressive. You were wonderful, Matt. And Happy New Year to everyone. And I will resend all the materials and affirmations this afternoon. Once I go through my list, I'll send one email to everyone. So thanks again. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks.